Well, the creation of Lost Edinburgh came about in 2011. It was all for my granddad, you see. He had dementia at that time. And he wasn't quite at the stage where he was forgetting names and faces, but he was, it was in the post. He was born in 1930, so I wanted to create something for him so he could rekindle the memories of his 20s and 30s, So the Edinburgh that he knew of the 50s and 60s. And that was the whole idea. And I set about creating a kind of DVD slideshow for him, set to all his favourite music and all that. And with a view to sitting down one afternoon, one Sunday afternoon, and enjoying this thing together. And that's precisely what I did. But it kind of spiralled out of all control, I became quite fascinated and obsessed to an extent. He was always telling me so many stories about the city, and we've got this great image of him at home. It's an old press photograph. He worked at the Caledonian railway station, which was at West End, at Princess Street there, the Cali Hotel. When it was a station, he worked there during its very last days, so between 1963 to 1965, and there's a great image of him standing there in the station with the ornate refreshments room behind him, and this very distinctive clock and all that. It's a beautiful image, and he's the only one looking at the camera. It's such a special image, and I remember showing that to him. I don't know when the last time he might have seen it. I don't know if he had ever seen it, but I had found it and I put it into this DVD slideshow I made him for the Lost Edinburgh DVD, and he just kept on asking me to rewind it and pause it, because it was obviously very kind of a special time for him, he was still in his 20s. Do you know what I mean? Prime of life and all that. And it just sort of snowballed, because every time I looked at a certain area of Edinburgh to maybe for some old images, off the internet or something like this, I would learn something. I'd learn something new. I would learn what was there before, and I just found myself so fascinated by that I wanted to create something afterwards that would help capture that and reveal to a wider audience what I had discovered for myself. About 3 or 4 months passed, and I decided to start like a website or something like that. But having no HTML skills, and at that time, 2011, I had no knowledge of WordPress or anything. I decided the best way forward was to set up a Facebook page.
Him and I used to kind of, when we were a lot younger, like kind of talking like 10, 15 years ago, when we had no money and all that kind of thing, no jobs or anything, we used to kind of just wander around Edinburgh and try and figure out from these old photographs that we had where things used to be and what streets used to be which. And we had old maps and all this kind of stuff that we used to get from like the library and stuff like that. Because it was a very early time in the internet, for which most people didn't have the internet by then, so it was difficult to get access to images, any kind of niche product like that. So of the few that we had, we used to kind of go around and try and map things out and do the whole before and after thing. Dave had the idea of almost like a DVD postcard kind of thing he was going to make for his granddad, and he'd been kind of making this thing up, and it had all these photos that we used before that we had appropriated from this one website in particular. And so him and I were kind of going over this idea. He brought it to me and thought, what should we do?
The Facebook page launched in August of 2011. I was quite aware at the time of copyright issues and all this kind of thing. And it was my friend Mike who eventually sort of pushed me off the precipice to actually launching it publicly. Something remarkable happened, because I don't know what I expected. I mean, there were a lot of images on there, maybe about 3,000 or something, covering the whole city. Basically what happened was 3 days in, we were sitting with about 1,000 followers, What? How can this, what? I guess because there was nothing else like that at the time on Facebook, maybe, I don't know. There weren't that many interesting groups at that time, pages for people to follow, especially on a local level. Now we're obviously saturated, but it just snowballed. I mean, 3-4 days in, we had 4,000 followers, and Grant Stott discovered us. At that time, he had his Fourth One show, and he started raving about Lost Edinburgh live on air. And it went from 4,000 to 10,000 that day or something like that, you know. And the next day, of course, the press come a calling. It's not every day that you get the evening news phoning you at your work, you know, that kind of thing, for an interview. And the Scotsman followed the day after. They did a double-page spread. After 10 days after the launch, we had 20,000 followers. It was incredible, you know. And we had so much praise coming our way, you know. There were people wide and far, from not just Edinburgh but all over the world, just saying what a fantastic idea, what a fantastic site. And all it was just a collection of old images. I think the reason why people have such a fascination with looking at a lot of the older images is, well, there are a number of reasons. I mean, for me, I think personally it was less of a nostalgia factor going on. It was a discovery, you know, particularly looking at images like Princess Street and seeing how it's changed and developed over the last half century even. Well, for a lot of other people, yeah, I think there's a huge sentimental factor deep in the centre of it, do you know what I mean? And I think a lot of people liked it. It's like a window to the past, do you know what I mean? We can't time travel. You know, old images and video, whatever, these are the only opportunities we have to actually travel back in time.
A number of years ago, I was identifying a big batch of photographs that had been found of Edinburgh in the 1960s, and when I was identifying the locations, and a number of these locations were the Canongate in Edinburgh and also Dumby Dykes, and these were places that had gone, but I managed to triangulate with maps, etc. Now, while I was going through that process, somebody put me in touch with Lost Edinburgh and said, oh, you should have a look at this Facebook page, it's just started up, it's really exciting, it's new, and I started contributing to it in comments. In time, I ended up communicating with Dave McLean, and Dave eventually said to me, Fraser, would you be interested in helping out, becoming an administrator with the Facebook page? And at that point I said, well, yeah, of course. And from then on, it's really been quite a ride basically, because it's just moved on, progressed in a fantastic way, with so many people now engaged in this content that we put up on a daily basis.
learn so much from old photographs, and it doesn't matter what era they're from, to be honest.
I think people have a kind of an affinity with the past. Edinburgh, as I said before, it's always had a staunch pride. When you show people images of the past of Edinburgh, it's immediately identifiable for the most part, unless it's like a random farm or something somewhere. But if it's town-based, people immediately know, because Edinburgh is so iconic. Its landmarks are everywhere. Yeah, it's about knowing. It's about the curiosity factor behind it. Like, in all these old houses, how many people have lived in them? What kind of stories do they have? What was the shop down the road? What did it used to be? What stood there before it? And the fact that you can walk across bits of like town squares or gardens that used to be buildings themselves, or they used to be completely different road layouts, etc. It's quite fascinating, and I think people have an intrinsic desire to know what that used to be or what something used to be, and it's interesting. It's hugely engaging.
I think people have got a fundamental interest in some of the old images. People like to know where they came from. They like to almost try to discover the context in which their grandparents, great-grandparents, their ancestors lived within. And coming from Edinburgh, it's such a fantastic place whereby you can actually read the history, you can read the buildings as you wander through the streets. And I think people are just absolutely fascinated by the actual photographs. There's a fundamental thing here, which is, you know, if you don't know where you've been, then you don't know where you're going. And the photographs through Lost Edinburgh, etc., they actually tell us the pathway through and where we're going.
Probably my favourite story connected with Lost Edinburgh. It's actually quite a recent one, which might surprise a lot of people. And I found this image online of these three punks walking along Princess Street, and it was taken in 1986, so they were obviously latter-day punks. But nonetheless, it was a great image, you know, with all the sort of spiked up hair and, you know, leather jackets and bicycle chains and whatever else. The guys really looked the part, and there was a girl in it as well. But I posted this image and it got such a great reaction, and it was just wonderful. But then what happened was, two of the three punks, which were in the picture, got in touch with the page and they started commenting, you know, in the thread and all that, which was quite amazing. And me posting this image on my Facebook page, it culminated in a punk reunion. All these punk pals who were all scattered across the world all got in touch with each other after seeing this image of themselves. And they had a punk reunion last June. There was about 30 of them or something, you know, coming from Australia and Canada and wherever else, you know, coming back to Edinburgh to see each other. They hadn't seen each other in 30 years, you understand? And that's quite incredible, you know, that's the power of that Facebook page. And I could tell you a million other stories, but that's one that really sticks with me because I just think that's just amazing, you know.
Well, my favourite story was just all the stuff when I was involved. That was generally the beginning, the birth of Lost Edinburgh, I guess. Definitely all the journalistic and press side of things. I loved that, having all the journalists phone us up and go and meet them, getting photographed and filmed, and that was great. Seeing us in the paper, it was brilliant. That was so much fun. I loved that, and just watching it as well, just being part of the early beginnings of it, where you could see the page just climbing and climbing and climbing, and growing exponentially. It was fantastic to see.
Many people get many different laughs out of people's comments, and some of them are wonderful comments that people put in telling a short story. But for me, it was a very strange one. We showed a photograph of a building and it had railings, simple railings. And the comment came, "I got my head stuck in them." No idea whatsoever how the guy got his head stuck, but that always made me laugh. Some of the lovely bits for me, some of the warm fuzzy moments for me, are when we maybe show a photograph of the Palais de Danse, the old dance hall in Fountain Bridge, of course, and You will have many people writing in saying, my mum, my dad, they met there. I met my wife there 50 years ago. You know, and these are lovely, lovely stories. This is making connections with places in the city, and this is about the people of Edinburgh. And that's one of the wonderful, wonderful aspects of it in terms of the nice stories. A lady wrote to us and said, thank you so much for all these wonderful photographs that you put up. My mother's got dementia, and when I take her through your Facebook page and I show her Lost Edinburgh, there's a spark that comes back, and she looks at the photographs along with me. Now, you know, if we do nothing else with Lost Edinburgh, that's worthwhile.
I think the greatest achievement for Lost Edinburgh, bar none, is the fact that we've managed to reach so many people. After a couple of years of the page, we had over 50,000 followers. That's gone up through 100,000 and it's now at 152,000 and counting. And I think that's quite incredible for what it is, a history stroke nostalgia page. To get so many people interested in the history of their city is just fantastic. We have notched up some special moments, you know, like we've had publishers coming at us with book deals and things like that. We had a book Edinburgh in the 1950s. We had the launch at Waterstones on George Street, which was great. It was like a book signing event. I got to pretend I was Ian Rankin for the day. I've been on the radio a few times. We were on the launch show of STV Edinburgh, which was a big one. We had to film a piece for them, and then we got to speak live on the couch with the first ever guests on. And it was a great moment, but totally bizarre, because the presenters, because it was a launch show, I think the presenters were probably more nervous than we were, you know, in case everything went completely messed up, you know. Thankfully it didn't. But that was a big moment, because there were over 180,000 people watching that launch show. By and large, that's kind of the standout, you know, achievement for me, other than the fact that we built up that following already. I've got to include Lost Glasgow as well. We started Lost Glasgow in 2015, and 6 months in, a former reporter, journalist at the Herald and Evening Times, he was doing the Evening Times memory section, and he just left his job a month prior to that, got in touch with the page to say, loved Lost Glasgow, and would love to get involved and take it on, which he did. The guy's name's Norrie Wilson, and he's taken that page to over 130,000 followers now in the 2.5 years since he took over the running of that. And that's quite incredible, because we now have over 250,000 people in Scotland's Central Belt following the two Lost pages. One of the other major achievements for Lost Edinburgh was the successful Forsyth Sphere campaign, which was essentially a heritage campaign I'd never been involved in before, which allowed me to build up some interesting contacts, like Mary Williams, who was the director of the Coburn Association. She's just left her role actually, but she was the director of the Coburn Association, which is Edinburgh's heritage watchdog. We managed to persuade the Arcadia group to return the sphere on top of the Forsyth building on Princess Street, which was a huge moment for me. Very, very special thing, and great to be involved in what turned out to be a successful campaign. Lost Edinburgh's helping to preserve the city's heritage because people can use it as an educational tool. I mean, they can look into the past and see the mistakes that were made then, and hopefully collectively learn from them and care about that, you know, because we've seen the negative impact which bad decisions can have. I mean, the St James development behind me, it's getting knocked down at the moment. It's only lasted a matter of 40 years because the areas that preceded it, the old St James Square and Leaf Street and Greenside and everything, were deemed to be slums, and they decided just to chop them down rather than try and save them, which was a real shame because they could have been renovated, they could have been refurbished. The rats and vermin could have, you know, been ushered out, but that wasn't the way that they thought then. They had a very different mentality. You know, there was no architectural preservation to speak of really, not until the sort of 1970s when listings start to come into effect en masse. We've highlighted a number of modern day issues on Lost Edinburgh, modern day planning issues, threatening the city, threatening the city's heritage, and I think that we can do something positive, you know, going forward. We can continue to have a positive impact and deliver something for the city which will benefit it long term, you know, saving the best parts of its history and preventing mistakes from being made.
So I think it's interesting now, the more and more photos that are coming to us through submissions of these kind of scenes, not just iconic architecture or, you know, interesting skylines and things like that, but just basic things like shops and houses and street scenes. From back then, we're getting lots of submissions of that, and that's becoming a lot more prevalent now that people are starting to send in things of, and have been sending things of, the same kind of scenes from the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, etc. And even looking back on them, it's fascinating to see, because it's amazing how much you forget over 20 years of your own life of how things have changed. When you're living somewhere, it's almost as if it never changes. Everything's always the same. It's a time capsule. It's boring. Nothing ever happens. But when you look at these images from even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, etc., it's a huge difference.
I think we must remember at this stage that Edinburgh is a World Heritage City, a UNESCO World Heritage City. In my view, at that point, we're at risk of losing that World Heritage status. Some of the development is not in keeping with, I believe, the reason that people come to Edinburgh, that visit Edinburgh. A number of the developments are lazy architecture, concrete, glass, bits of steel, and not in the context of the buildings and the surrounding and the environment around them. Where Lost Edinburgh comes in is it does draw people's attention to the wonderful architecture that exists. It keeps on doing that. It runs campaigns. It will support campaigns to try to preserve something of the city and the whole ambience of the city and the architecture. It's a vital, vital role. Now, there are a number of societies, obviously, and associations who work on this to a much more professional extent than Lost Edinburgh. But in our small way, Lost Edinburgh hopefully will draw people's attention to some of the wonderful stuff that is there. But we must ensure that we don't lose some of this.
There seems to be a lot of the same types of bland buildings popping up everywhere. And it's not just me saying this, you know. There seems to be a lot of sort of sandstone-clad glass box-type architecture going up everywhere. Particularly on St Andrew's Square, on the south side of St Andrew's Square, there was a hugely controversial development. The new TK Maxx building that went up. They demolished 4 buildings, 3 of which were, I think 2 of which were B-listed, 1 was A-listed, the Provident building. And it was a bit of a scandal really, you know, to see these buildings come down, because they did make a positive impact on that part of the city. Whereas this new building, and like a lot of other modern developments, it doesn't really say anything, it doesn't say anything about the city. It doesn't really respect everything else that's around it. It's incongruous, it doesn't fit in. You've maybe got Georgian churches and then Victorian tenements and other buildings built from different eras, even going into the 20th century, they all fit in together well up until, I guess, sort of the interwar era, when we started to change building materials. They'll fit in well because we're using a lot of the local stone types from the local quarries. And then after that, they start to kind of meddle about and mix about different stone types and material types, building types, designs, and it just doesn't work. See, the Canongate was always an independent borough from Edinburgh for many centuries. It was outside the city walls. You had the Netherbow port up the road to the area just before you get to the World's End pub, which is why it's called the World's End, because that's where the world of Edinburgh literally came to an end. And then when the two boroughs amalgamated together, you started to see a more familiar type of architecture start to creep into both boroughs. And into the late 19th century, a lot of the old tenements actually got knocked down and redeveloped. And to be honest, very, very few medieval structures actually stand today in the old town of Edinburgh and in the Canongate. Even this behind us, this White Horse Close, this is a sympathetic reproduction of what was there. The original medieval structure from the 17th century was torn down in the 50s, 1950s, for what we see here. And I think only elements of the interior and a few of the exterior are actually original. But that's what a lot of people don't actually appreciate, is the fact that for a lot of the 20th century we were quite sympathetic in terms of restoration and preservation in Edinburgh's Old Town. You know, you had guys like Ebenezer McCrae, who was city architect during the 20s and 30s, just before the Second World War. He came in and he did a lot of work in the Canongate with the redevelopment of a lot of the old crumbling tenements. But rather than just sweep it all away and create something that was vastly different, he wanted to maintain the integrity of the old town and maintain its character. He was really keen to preserve that. And we were lucky to have guys like that in charge at that time. Had we had some of the guys who were responsible for the decisions that were made later on in the 1960s and 70s, who knows what might happen. I mean, they wanted to, for example, they wanted to run a motorway right through the old town, you know, at one point, which was going to separate like St Mary's Street and Jeffrey Street. It was going to cut right through that. I mean, the area has changed vastly. I mean, obviously you've got the Scottish Parliament across the road there, and the old brewery lands got knocked down in the late 90s. Obviously they were, Scottish and Newcastle moved out and everything like that. But there's been a great deal of redevelopment in the last 25, 30 years, you know, since I've been alive. Certainly it's changed a lot. But by and large, I think the character, the real character of the place has managed to stay, and that's a good thing. Digital technology has helped what I do tremendously. You know, I mean, a couple of decades ago, you'd have to go into your local library, or you'd have to buy umpteen books on Edinburgh's history, you know, to even scratch the surface of what people like me are doing. Whereas nowadays, it's so freely available. You know, there's a wealth of photographic material online. It's on the web. It's on Lost Edinburgh. See, I've never been interested in. I mean, although in my house I've got lots of different photographs and slides and everything like that. Once I've got that scanned into my computer, I don't really have any great need or desire to keep the physical item. You know, the artifact means very little to me. I'll happily sell that on, because once I've got the image in the digital format, then the next logical step is to share it with the audience that I have, and that's all I really care about. You know. Just inciting the discussion, putting it out there for people to look at. What's the point in a photograph if nobody can see it? You know what I mean? I believe it should be free for all, you know, particularly if it's of historic interest.
The advantage of digital technology is what we can do is we can really preserve for the future many of the images that we rely on in Lost Edinburgh and that we've shown within Lost Edinburgh. We obviously come by a large number of photographs, submissions from people, and it's great to have these digitalised so that we can preserve these. Now, an example that I could give you is I had a set of photographs from 1924 which were showing Leith and the conditions that people lived in Leith in 1924, and they were commissioned by the City Council. This came into my hands, this collection of photographs, through a network of old Leithers, and with that, I was asked to ensure that I preserved these photographs and kept them for future generations to see. I approached Edinburgh University, and they did the most magnificent restoration job. As a result of that, they are donated to Edinburgh University archives, but can be viewed by everyone online. Now, what a fantastic thing that is, between the actual hard copy of the photograph and now accessed by all online. Just wonderful. Fascinating and absolutely vitally important what we can do with technology now.
I enjoy all types of photo formats, you know. At home I've got standard prints, and I've got little 35mm colour slides, you know, these little Kodachrome slides. They're wonderful, you know, they're magic. From 1950s onwards, you know, a lot of people were going out taking them, especially tourists, American tourists especially, because they had the money. They came over with all their, you know, deep pockets and expensive Kodak colour cameras. In an era when very few Scottish people were taking colour photos, the American tourist photographs of Edinburgh from that period are absolutely invaluable. And you can find a lot of that sort of stuff on like online auction sites. And it's just wonderful, you know, seeing all the 1950s and 60s fashions and all the colours popping out like firecrackers. Other types of slides as well. You can get these large format glass magic lantern Victorian glass slides. They're quite heavy. They're about sort of 3 inches by 3 inches, you know, sort of square format slides. And the only way of getting them scanned in is, well, for me, I have to go along to the Kodak shop up the bridges to get this scanned in, you know, and it cost me about £6 a time, just for one scan.
I love glass slides. That's the old slide negatives that were produced mid 1800s right on through to 1910 and beyond. But within each of these glass slides, the resolution is so high that there are actually a whole number of individual photographs. If you cut them, chop them, and look about these, you really need to investigate. They are worth interrogating, old glass slides, because, as I say, the detail is so fantastic and can show so much.
Everything's got its pluses and minuses. But I think the magic lantern, the Victorian glass slides, are interesting because they're such high quality. And a lot of them are from the 1870s and 1880s, which are a time in photography which, believe it or not, a lot of people don't appreciate just how advanced we were in terms of crispness. You know, yes, if somebody moved, there was a lot of blurring and all this kind of thing. But as long as you had a stationary subject, you know, the cameras were pretty advanced by that stage. You know, and the clarity and the definition of an image is something I find quite astonishing. from images of that time. A lot of great detail in these magic lantern slides once you get them scanned in.
The other type of photograph that I very much enjoy is the unknown photograph, the photograph that shows an unknown location. And that can be from the 1970s, the 1960s, which I spent a long time identifying locations out of about 1,000 photographs of Edinburgh. Fantastic stuff that was, geek or freak, one or the other. Anyway, so I love to identify, I love the puzzle of it. I think people enjoy when we put up in Lost Edinburgh a photograph seeking information. Where is this? Does anyone recognise this? Absolutely fascinating that people will spend time, do research, and then post back their comments, which gives us a real clue as to the origin of some of the photographs.
About 4 years ago, I was approached by the digital editor at Scotsman to collaborate with the newspaper, like the online newspaper, which we did, and I eventually managed to twist their arm into to let me write a few articles for them. So I became freelance at Scotsman. 4 or 5 years on now, I'm now full-time with them. So I've now got a job working at the Scotsman and Even News, which it's all because of Lost Edinburgh. I write quite Edinburgh-centric articles concerning the history of the city, and of course they'll get shared on the Lost Edinburgh Facebook page as well. And of course the audience, the tailor-made audience which I've built up over these years, are not going to complain. I've been given an extra little history lesson, so it's a win-win for me and for my employers as well, and for Lost Edinburgh. I'm obsessed, I'm absolutely obsessed with tracking the major changes which have taken place in Edinburgh, especially buildings. That's my thing. You know, I'm not going to lie, that's one of the main reasons that I set up the Lost Edinburgh Facebook page, was because, you know, taken away from the afternoon that I spent with my granddad, setting up a Facebook page was all about sharing the sort of wider architectural changes in the city over the kind of past few generations. And I love discovering a photograph which shows one of these changes either taking place, or it shows something that was there before, such as buildings on Princess Street. A lot of the buildings which have fallen down or have been knocked down, burnt down, it doesn't matter where in the city, it's always interesting to see what was there before, you know. And so a lot of the time, a lot of these changes aren't for the better, and that kind of thing solicits a kind of a wow reaction from people when they see it. You know, if they didn't know that something like that was there beforehand, before this, you know, 1960s concrete structure, you know, which they pass by every day, and you know, 99% of the population thinks is vital. They're kind of amazed to see that something which they think is beautiful was knocked down to make way for it. In the future, I want to create, first of all, a website. We've been talking about it for years. I've just never really had the time. Would absolutely love for Lost Edinburgh to have a website, and then maybe onto something else like world domination. Who knows, man? I don't know, honestly. It'd be great. It'd be great to branch out into other things. Maybe do a bit more television. Certainly a book. A book would be wonderful. I've always had a kind of a dream, a vision of a large format coffee table book of then and now's, large format images, that kind of thing. That'd be absolutely wonderful. So if there are any publishers that are watching this, then that'd be good.
I don't think there's much scope in terms of growing the brand of Lost Edinburgh, if there is one. But there's always room for growth or some kind of I don't know, innovation or idea to improve it. But I think for the meantime, it's just concentrate on the good thing that it is, not to try and expand or add to it or improve something which is already doing a great job. And I think it's doing a fantastic job as it is. So I think just keep it going, keep a good thing going, yeah.
Oh, I see Lost Edinburgh continuing. I think there's a constant fascination. There's a new audience every day. There's a world audience for Lost Edinburgh, which is great. Because Lost Edinburgh, and very much Edinburgh, the city itself, it's a city that attracts 4 million visitors every year. People come here for the history, for the heritage. So not only do we have our homegrown Lost Edinburgh followers, but there's also people in the rest of Scotland, but also the rest of the world. Our North Americans, our Australian, New Zealand, etc. We've got many people who follow it from a number of the more obscure countries. I think there's one follower in Venezuela. Great. So we have got a whole number of people, and I think that will continue. I think there are only so many photographs of Edinburgh, though, at the end of the day. And that's why we need to really explore some of the high-resolution images of the past, to look for the small details, to interrogate photographs really quite hard to make sure that we're getting the most out of them. There are only so many, as I say. I think obviously the role of Lost Edinburgh is one to make comment on the city itself and some of the developments that are happening in the city. I think that's a role for it, and I think it will continue to be a role for it. Some of the campaigning work that it's done in the past, I think will continue in the future.
Honestly, I'm just so happy with what it has achieved. It's been the biggest success of my life, personally, for me, and I'm really delighted to see that it brings a lot of other people happiness as well. And that's it, really. What more can you ask for?